Let's talk about our wide receiver start sits. 5 names on here, different degrees of depth. Some of these are upside flyers that you may be looking at a flex spot or a desperation wide receiver 2 spot, with guys like Tyler Boyd injured that were on a lot of these fantasy championship lineups. But a guy who's been emerging as of late, Lynn Bowden, rookie, now on the Dolphins, was actually drafted by the Raiders, got traded in a deal there. But he's quietly produced over the last 3 weeks for the Miami Dolphins. Tua is targeting this guy, and he's been relatively productive. He is used a little bit as a running back. I know initially he was drafted by the Raiders to be a running back. A lot of people were looking at that and saying, oh, fade Josh Jacobs this year. He's not going to get any passing work because it's all going to go to Lynn Bowden. The hype train was definitely at full blast for Bowden, but 9 points, 15 points, and 10 points the last 3 weeks. Last week played 91% of snaps. 6 catches for 37 yards. Are you willing in a very tough spot, right? Some of these deeper leagues where you're competing for high point, the waivers are still absolutely decimated, and you got to find a way to win right now in a championship. Are you willing to plug Lynn Bowden in there if you really, 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 really need to?
Yeah, deep league. I'm willing to plug him in. I mean, especially if Devontae Parker is out. Parker has been limited in practice, so keep an eye on it. But if Parker misses this game, I think I'm willing to sneak Lynn Bowden in there. He's got running back eligibility in several places as well. So if you're in a league where he has running back eligibility and you're scraping the bottom of the barrel at the RB spot and you're deciding between like a Ty Johnson and a Lynn Bowden in a PPR league, that's where you can go to someone like Lynn Bowden and kind of use that little hack to give you a higher floor for someone who's getting receptions. I mean, 91% of snaps last week for Lynn Bowden. Bowden, I've said it like 3 different ways since I started talking, so I'm just kind of hedging that one a little bit, but whether you realize it or not, this is a revenge game. He's going against the Raiders, who drafted him several months back and traded Lynn Bowden early in the season. So, I think you can play him in a pinch. It's not something you feel good about, not something you're going to be super optimistic about his upside or anything like that. But they're utilizing him. 7 targets last week, 9 targets the week before, in a game against the Raiders where, the Raiders typically have been involved in a lot of shootout games this year.
Yeah, depending on how things shake out with the Dolphins' weapons group, Lynn Bowden could be really interesting next year as a guy that you could take towards the bottom 3 rounds. We'll have to keep our eyes on him and see how he produces, because he's looked pretty good when he's been out there. But let's talk about Marquise Brown, a guy that has gone from, draft him high, he's going to have a great season. I was leading the hype train on Hollywood Brown coming into the year. Thought Lamar was going to continue to improve as a passer, pass the ball a little bit more. We saw that in the first couple weeks, and then it fell off. And then it was like, oh, Hollywood Brown's a waiver guy. Go ahead and drop him. He's not even worth it. But now he's been emerging again. Has a great matchup this week against the New York Giants. I shouldn't say great matchup, a solid matchup.
Yeah.
But are you willing to flex Marquise Brown now that you're in the championship? Probably a guy that you had. You're comparing him to other flex names like a Tyler Boyd, like a Michael Pittman, like a Brandon Cooks. If you're looking at those type of names, are you looking at Marquise Brown as the guy that you want to plug in over those?
He's someone you can start, but I would try not to. I'm worried about Brown. I know he's had 4 straight good weeks. 18, 14, 13, and 15 fantasy points, but a lot of those have been relying on touchdowns. This past week was the first week that he really got a solid fantasy day on volume all season long, and it was 6 catches for 98 yards, only 15 fantasy points. Other than that, it's kind of been touchdown or bust for Hollywood Brown for the majority of the season. And in a game against the Giants where Daniel Jones, we don't know if he's playing or not, I don't know what that game script is going to look like, if it's necessarily going to be a shootout. I'm worried about Hollywood Brown's volume in that game. I don't know that he's necessarily going to see 7-8 targets in this one. So he could always break that big play touchdown, but he's a boomer bust guy, and I'm trying to fade Hollywood Brown if I can. I will say, we just talked about Lynn Bowden. I think if Devontae Parker is out, I might actually start Lynn Bowden over Hollywood Brown, just because I would want a higher floor there. And we clearly have seen the trend from Bowden that if Parker is out and he's going to get the snaps, that he's going to see enough targets to have a floor. With Hollywood Brown, we haven't seen that all season long. But he's kind of right on that cusp. If you need a boomer bust option, if you're going against a stacked team and you need points, you need someone who can get you 20 to 30 points. Brown is in that category because he could always, break a couple big plays deep, but the consistency and the volume is just not there.
He has been really good over the last 4 weeks, which tempts me to start him. But I think back to what we were just talking about in the running back start sits with Devin Singletary, that yes, these are boom bust guys, but even their boom games aren't really that crazy. You're never going to see a 20-plus point outing. I mean, last 4 weeks for Hollywood Brown, his best stretch of the season, 18, 14, 13, and 16 fantasy points. I think you could do that again, but does that really get you excited in a championship matchup? No, and the floor is lower than a lot of guys out there, which is why you're going with Bowden if Parker's out. So, yeah, I think I have Hollywood Brown this week as a wide receiver 3, a solid flex that you can play. I don't think the upside is quite as high as we all thought it was coming into the year because he just hasn't had those big games. I don't know if it's him. Is it Lamar Jackson? Is it just the offense? Don't really know right now, but he is playing close to 80% of snaps every game. I think you can do worse, but I'm looking at other options if I can. Again, would I probably have him in that 37 wide receiver range, 34 to 37 if we're talking rankings. Next one here on this list we need to talk about is Rashard Higgins.
From your Brownies.
Been balling out a little bit. Has a matchup against a pass funnel team in the New York Jets. We saw them. The Jets are quietly stout against the run. They're not letting teams run all over them. They're just clogging the box. But that's leaving the wide receivers wide open on an island with some pretty brutal cornerback play. So are you willing to plug in Rashard Higgins against the Jets over a guy like Hollywood Brown?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll absolutely play him against the Jets. Great matchup. We look at what Higgins is doing. I mean, he's on a tear. 21 points, 18 points, 11 points. He's seeing targets in this offense from Baker Mayfield. He's got 24 targets in the last 3 weeks alone, and he's a touchdown threat. We've seen 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games, and ever since Odell has gone out, he's really stepped up. So it took him a couple weeks because I know they had those crazy weather games where the Browns offense looked awful because they're playing in crazy weather. Baker was getting criticized. Some of the receiving options were getting criticized. But as we've seen over these past several weeks, Baker has been playing really, really good football this year. Landry and Higgins are playing fantastic, and the running game is absolutely cruising as well. So I think Higgins is actually, a pretty strong play in this game. I think he's got a pretty good floor. I think he's a low-end wide receiver 3 for me this week. But the floor is higher for Higgins than it is for a guy like Hollywood Brown.
Yeah, I'm looking at Higgins over all those names that we've talked about up to this point. I think he has a higher floor, and I actually think he has a higher upside just against the Jets. If they can do anything now, like maybe the Jets come in and have a little swagger after their first win of the season. Now they want to try to compete. Maybe this game, the over-under is not anything to be crazy about, but if they can end up shutting down Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb, which I doubt they'll be able to, but if they somehow can, this is going to be a game where Baker is just peppering these receivers with targets, and so that brings a extremely high floor to Rashard Higgins. I've loved him. Now let's talk about a more chalk option that I think some people might be tilting on. They drafted him pretty high, and for the most part, he's been disappointing this season, not due to anything of his own volition for that, but Amari Cooper. He has a matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles this week. Where are you putting Amari Cooper in your rankings? Is he a guy that you feel confident starting after an abysmal outing, less than 3 fantasy points?
I do. I still feel confident in Cooper. I mean, he's every receiver for the most part. I mean, there's a handful of guys that are at the top of the list and elite and produce every single week. We talked about it with a guy like Stephon Diggs earlier. But Cooper just had a bad game. The Cowboys offense had a weird, different game where Tony Pollard totally took over. CeeDee Lamb played great as well, and they didn't really need to do a ton through the air in this one because San Francisco's offense was absolutely dysfunctional in that game. But in a matchup against Philly, I think you can play Cooper. Andy Dalton has actually been okay for Amari Cooper. In games with Andy Dalton, this is really the first time we've seen him struggle. The 4 weeks prior, 15, 16, 23, 14 fantasy points in each of those games. He's the number 13 wide receiver in PPR formats on the year. A little bit hybrid there between Dak, Dalton, DiNucci, Garrett Gilbert. So, all things considered in this Cowboys offense, all things considered and how we think about Amari Cooper, the fact that he's still the wide receiver 13 on the year, he's still someone you have to start every single week. You got to realize the floor is a bit lower with Andy Dalton at quarterback. The Eagles aren't a great matchup. They're not a terrible matchup either, so I think he can definitely get it done in this game.
Yeah, I'm locking in Amari Cooper against the Eagles as my wide receiver 2, locked and loaded, no question. If I have to plug him in as my 1, so be it. I'll hedge with some upside names, but you have to start Amari Cooper. Don't overreact to the down week. That's all we wanted to say on him. Chase Claypool, last one here. It's a rough go of things at this point. Big Ben seemingly hasn't been able to throw the ball more than 4 yards on a pass attempt. He has had some, big throws to Deontay Johnson in the end zone, but he's really just hung around the line of scrimmage. Chase Claypool has been used primarily as their deep threat, their outside guy who's going to be able to stretch the field for them. After some big boom weeks, the floor's kind of fallen out from under Chase Claypool. So for a guy as a rookie in a tough matchup against the Colts, is he a guy that you're considering at all?
This is where it gets tough, and I think I'm sitting him. I don't think I can trust him right now. I mean, you just have to look at where the Pittsburgh offense is trending. And the last 3 games, they've really struggled. They've obviously lost 3 straight games. In those 3 games is when we've really seen the dip in production from Claypool as well, because the offense as a whole isn't getting it done. Only 5, 4, and 7 fantasy points over those last 3 games. Now they get a Colts team that's hot. The defense is playing really, really well. So, yeah, I'm trying to fade Claypool. I mean, Juju and Deontay are in that offense that are obviously getting it done. I know Ebron's a little banged up, but I don't think Ebron, if he were to miss this game, necessarily elevates Claypool enough to where the point that Claypool is suddenly relevant. So, look, Claypool could come out, and he's a one-play guy. He could have a 75-yard touchdown, gives him a solid week. I just don't think it's going to happen against the Colts. I'm not betting on it to happen. So I'm going to kind of play the odds here, and I'll sit down Claypool against the Colts this week.
I'll say Claypool too, and you don't have to look much farther than his catch rates over the last couple of weeks. And I think a lot of it is due to Big Ben, some of it's due to Claypool too, rookie rust, whatever. I like Claypool as a player, but I mean, caught 3 for 8 last week. Before that, 3 for 6. I mean, guy's about 50% catch rate, and he's not getting the most targets on the team. So unless they're going to be in boat races, which they might be against the Colts, to your point, he's a one play guy. Could get you your week, get you to a satisfied point, but I'm not looking at it all if I'm in week 16 in the championship, in the playoffs. I'm dropping Chase Claypool. I'm trying to find another option there if I can. He's definitely a sit for me in championship lineups.